Hello everyone, my name is Ratkovic Miloje, and in this video course we will talk about Nimzo-Indian Defense. This opening was developed by Aaron Nimzovic, and that's why it's called Nimzo-Indian Defense. This is one of the most solid openings for black against d4, and it was played by many world champions, almost by all of them, and you will see that it's not that difficult for black to fight for equality in this opening, and generally this opening is suitable for more positional players than for players who like sharp positions and a lot of tactics in early stages of game. But also you will see that it's possible to have some sharp positions where you can show your tactical skills, and also white has to be very careful in opening, because if white isn't careful, then very quickly you can get equal position, or even you can be much better. So we will start with a classical variation. d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4. So in case white doesn't play knight c3, in case white does knight f3, then it's not Nimzo-Indian Defense. Then you can go in Bogo-Indian or Queen C-Indian. But if white does knight c3 here and after bishop b4, then we have Nimzo-Indian Defense. Like you will see, there is a lot of possible moves at this moment for white. So white can play e3 or knight f3 or g3, so there is a lot of moves, even a3 or f3, but we will start with classical variation and probably with the most popular variation for white, and that is queen c2 at this moment. So generally you know for the rule that it's not good to develop queen so quickly, and it's not good to play with queen in early stages of game. But this move makes sense because white wants to defend knight on c3, and now white will not have doubled pawns on c5. So that's the point of playing queen c2. After queen c2, black has many different moves, but you will see also in other videos that we will analyze for black systems with c5. So whatever white plays here, like e3 or knight f3 or g3 or f3, always you will play c5, fourth move. Except when white plays a3. Of course, after a3 you need to take on c3, and then you will play c5. So after queen c2 you will play c5 as well, and the point of playing this move is that you want to attack the center as soon as possible to put pressure to d4 pawn. And now you will see what will white play, but generally you will have very clear position in the center, and you will see that it's not that complicated and that difficult for black to develop. So after c5, almost all people play dc5, and generally that is best move for white. And after dc5 we will play short castle. So first of all, the name of this variation when you play c5 is Berlin variation. After dc5, also here black has a lot of different moves, so black can go knight a6 or take bishop c5, but we will analyze short castle. So this one is called Pierz variation. After short castle, white can play okay, there are a lot of possible moves for white, but two main moves are a3 or knight f3. We will start with knight f3. So you see that this is very logical for white to develop pieces like this. White is developing knights, and with queen on c2, then white wants to go maybe bishop g5 or even bishop f4 in some lines. Also at some moment white will play a3 to force you to take on c3, and then white will take with the queen, of course. After knight f3 you play knight a6. The thing is that you want to develop your knight and to take with knight on c5. So generally you will bring the knight to the center, and you will do it with tempo, because you will take that pawn on c5. You can also see that the main problem in black's position is bishop on c8. But after taking on c5 with your knight, it will be very easy for you to develop this bishop, because you will see that you have lines where you can play even d5 or just b6 with bishop b7, what's completely in the spirit of Nimzo-Indian. And this position is generally slightly better for white, but if you memorize few next moves, you will see that generally you will have equal position. The main move for white at this moment is g3. Also here white can play many different things, like bishop d2 or a3, even c6 or e3, but g3 is the main move. After g3, of course, you take knight c5, white plays bishop g2, and then you play b6. So first of all, don't be scared to play b6. So now it seems very dangerous for black to do this, because white has some discovered attacks with the knight. But white cannot do anything concrete with that, and it only seems dangerous for black, but it's not dangerous, because wherever white moves the knight, let's imagine white plays something like knight g5, you will just go bishop e7, and white just wasted time for a knight g5, and this position is already equal or even slightly better for black. So after b6, the best move for white is to play short castle, so just to keep developing pieces, and after that you play bishop b7. So you can see that this position is generally equal, but we can say that it's a little bit easier to play as white, because white has space advantage, and this position would be completely, I mean, pawn structure would be almost completely symmetrical if there is not c pawn and d pawn. So that is white's advantage here. White has c4 pawn, you have d7 pawn. So generally that one on c4 is more active, and that pawn is controlling the center. But basically at some moment you will play something like d5 or even d6. So that's why it's not a big problem for black. And also black developed all minor pieces, what is very important. So black moved the king from the center and developed all minor pieces. Also, black doesn't have obvious weaknesses in his position, so that's why this position is very solid for black. The main move at this moment for white is knight b5. So what does white want to do now? White wants to maybe put knight to d6. Also white wants to play a3, and then after a3 your bishop will be trapped. So of course you need to do something about that, and here very good idea for black is to play bishop e4. The question is why. So you want to free b7 square for your knight, and the next move after white moves the queen, you play knight to b7, and now after a3 you can retreat your bishop to e7. So you can see that now black pieces are coordinated very well. At some moment you will play d5 or rook c8, and you have very good position. White needs to keep developing, and the most logical move for white is bishop f4. So now white is touching c7 square, and at some moment maybe white wants to jump knight c7 or even bishop c7, and after bishop f4 you play rook c8. So now you're attacking pawn on c4, and you see that you're developing pieces with tempo, and now white is forced to defend that pawn. So white is forced to play rook c1, and then you play a6. Now white has to move back his knight, knight c3, then you take bishop f3. So this, for example, this line is not that complicated, but it's very important for you to memorize these things. So it seems very forcing. All those moves are very logical. So maybe you need just to remember this idea with bishop e4 and knight b7, because that is a little bit unusual. But also something like that is logical, because white wants to play a6, and then you're forced to move your bishop somewhere. You can see that now you don't have good square for the bishop, so that's why you want to open up that diagonal a3 f8 for the bishop, and to retreat bishop to e7. So like we said, bishop e7, bishop f4, rook c8, attacking c4. White has to defend it, and then you play a6. Now white plays knight c3. So this variation is one of the sharpest variations in Nimzo-Indian defense, because now you will sacrifice the exchange, and you will see how does it look. So knight c3, you take bishop f3, so you will give up your light square bishop, but now white has problems with c4 pawn. So this is the weakness in white position, and of course white cannot play something like b3, because then you will take on a3. For that reason, white is forced to do something very direct, very active, and we can say that white is forced to play b4 to attack your knight. When you take knight c4, then white will play bishop b7. Like I said, you will sacrifice the exchange, but you will get a fantastic compensation for the exchange. You will have very strong counterplay. Also, position of your pieces will be very active, especially look your knight on c4. So that knight is very strong, closing up the rook from c1, attacking a3, and generally controlling a lot of squares. So that's why here black has compensation. After bishop b7, you need to play knight h5. You're attacking the bishop. White is gonna take, you take. White has to move the bishop, otherwise you will take on f4 and white's pawn structure will be completely ruined. And when white moves back his bishop, then you will play b5. So this is one of the main lines in Nimzo-Indian defense, and you can see that you are the exchange down, but for rook you have knight and pawn. And also you can notice that this knight on c4 is fantastic, because it is controlling a lot of squares. You're putting pressure to a3. At some moment you can go d5, and black's position is fantastic here, I think. And we can say that this position is unclear, but I think it's much easier to play it as black than as white. Let's now go back. So this is about b4 for white at this moment, and we saw that you will take knight c4, you will sacrifice the exchange. And yes, very important, remember, is that you need to play knight h5 in between move, because you just want to remove white's dark square bishop from f4, and then you will play b5. Instead of b4, white can also do something different, and there is one very interesting line for white. White can play queen d3 here. This doesn't seem so logical, because now white is sacrificing the pawn on c4. But when you take knight c4, and generally best for black is to take knight c4, white can go b3. So now your knight is under attack. Of course, you're forced to move back your knight. You will not take on a3, because white has, again, bishop b7 to trap your rook, or just to trap your knight. I mean, a3 isn't so good square for the knight, so you are forced to move back your knight, and then white again play with that pawn. White plays b4. b4, then you need to move your knight, and white plays something like e4. So now white sacrificed the pawn for initiative, and white's pieces are more active. Also, white has bishop spare. But here you need to remember one fantastic idea for black, and if you remember that, probably you will be much better after a few more moves. So here, a fantastic move for black is knight e8. So what's the point of this move? In case white does something like, let's say, rook f1, what's perfectly logical for white, then you play g5. So now you play for counterplay, and you're gaining a lot of space. Also, you created outpost for your knight on e5. So the next move, when white moves the bishop, you will jump knight e5. So bishop e3, for example, knight e5. White has to move the queen, and you go knight d6. Look now your knights. They are so good there, and they are controlling a lot of space and a lot of squares, and these knights are much better than white's bishops. So bishops are doing nothing now. And at this moment, black is better, of course. So playing something like rook d1 isn't good for black. Sorry, for white. What is, very logical for white to play. So rook d1 is probably the most logical move here, because white is just developing the rook, and that is with tempo, because white is attacking this side pawn. But like you see, you have g5, knight e5, knight d6, and you will be better. Instead of rook fd1, probably best move for white is to stop g5, and white needs to play h4. After h4, you can just go b5, and we can say that this position is equal. So in the future we will play also d6 to secure that pawn. Your pawn up, but like I said, white has initiative and white is better developed, but generally this is equal, and it's not that complicated for black. And you can see that white doesn't have some very strong attack or something similar. So white has positional advantage, white has more space, but also black doesn't have any weaknesses in position. Also, we can say that black's pieces are active except knight on e8, and again you will just play d6, develop your queen somewhere, and this is playable position, and like I said, it's probably equal. This was about e4 here. So white plays e4, you play knight e8. The idea is playing g5 with knight e5, and in case your opponent let you do this, you will be better. Instead of e4, also very logical for white is to take there, to take queen a6, but now you will just go rook a8 and you will take back that pawn. So again, you will be pawn up, and again it will be very simple position for black to play. This was about queen d3 at this moment. So white has this idea, and don't be surprised if you see this in your games, and it would be good to memorize this taking on c4 and everything what we said, because this is not so popular for white to play queen d3, but it can happen, and if you're not sure what to do, you can struggle there. So that's why you need to remember it. Let's move back now. At this moment we said that white needs to play knight c3, and like we saw, he will take bishop f3, then knight a5 later, and it's good position for black. But also here, very logical for white is to play knight d6. So this is even more logical than knight c3, because with this move white isn't retreating his knight, and white just wants to trade some minor pieces, and then again we can say that white will have space advantage. Also here you will not have a chance to sacrifice the exchange or to do something very active, so now probably position will be equal and it will not be sharp position at all. After knight d6 you need to trade everything there, so you take knight d6, bishop d6, queen d6, and then you play queen c7. After queen c7, of course, if white takes, you will take with your rook, then you can double up your rooks. Also at some moment you can take space in the center, so you can play d5, and at least it will be equal position. So white shouldn't trade queen c7. White needs to defend his queen and to play rook fd1. After that you just move your queen to b7. And what to say about this position? First of all, you have backward pawn on d7, but it's very easy for you to move that pawn. So it's enough to play the next move rook c6 and then to go d5, and that's it. You don't have that problem anymore with your pawn. Also, we can say that weakness in white position is c4 pawn. Also, white is a little bit struggling with this, so you have very strong battery on long diagonal, and white cannot move his knight wherever he wants. So when white moves his knight, white needs to defend his bishop on g2. So generally this position is completely equal, but I think it's easy for black to play, because like I said, you can play d5 in the future. You can even play b5. So to open up c-file, you have very strong bishop on e4, and generally this battery with bishop and queen is fantastic there. So we can say that black doesn't have any problems, and generally it's very easy for black to play this, and position is at least equal. So this was about knight d6. After knight d6 you will trade everything. If white plays knight c3, then you will have a chance to play those sharp variation with taking on f3, knight a5. There is also that line where you sacrifice the exchange, and like we saw, positions are good for black. Also, if knight d6, again you will just trade everything and position will be completely equal.